Good day, everyone, especially to you, Coach Jude, and to my fellow classmates. I am Mika Aliana Esanico from Team Assiduous, who will introduce our topic for today. Along with me are my active members, Mr. John Gael Atilano, Miss Riza Bubotan, Mr. Nicole Canciller, and Miss Elame Casimiro. So in this presentation, we will tackle about the following learning principles, starting with psychoanalytic and psychosexual theory by Sigmund Freud, cognitive theory by Jean Piaget, psychosocial theory of development by Erik Erikson, sociocultural theory by Bronwen Frenner, classical conditioning by Ivan Pavlov, operant conditioning by B.F. Skinner, multiple intelligences theory by Howard Gardner, metacognitive by John Flavel, and lastly, laws of learning by Edward Thorndike. So what are we waiting for? Let's begin! So first in the list of learning principles is Sigmund Freud theory of psychoanalytic and psychosexual. So Sigmund Freud was an Austrian neurologist born on May 6, 1856 and died September 23, 1939. He is the founder of psychoanalysis, a clinical method for treating psychopathology through dialogue between a patient and a psychoanalyst. In 1896, Freud coined the term psychoanalysis. This is the treatment of mental disorders, emphasizing on the unconscious mental processes. It is also called depth psychology. Freud developed the psychoanalytic theory of personality development, which argued that personality is formed through conflicts among three fundamental structures of the human mind, which is the id, ego, and superego. According to Freud, our personality develops from the interactions among what he proposed as the three fundamental structures of the human mind. The conflicts among these three structures and our efforts to find balance among what each of them desires. It determines how we behave and approach the world. Sigmund Freud also emphasized the importance of the unconscious mind, and a primary assumption of Freudian theory is that the unconscious mind governs behavior to a greater degree than people suspect. What balance we strike in any given situation determines how we will resolve the conflict between two overarching behavioral tendencies: our biological aggressive and pleasure-seeking drives versus our socialized internal control over those drives. While psychosexual, in the other hand, in 1904, Freud proposed the personality development in childhood takes place during 5 psychosexual stages, which is the oral, anal, phallic, latency, and genital stages. So, during each stage, sexual energy or the libido is expressed in different ways and through different parts of the body. These are called psychosexual stages because each stage represents the fixation of libido, roughly translated as sexual drives or instincts, on a different area of the body. So next, the second principles is the cognitive theory by Jean Piaget. Jean William Fritz Piaget was a Swiss psychologist born on August 9, 1896 and died on September 16, 1980. He is known for his work on child development, and Piaget placed great importance on education of children, which is very true. Much of Piaget's interest in the cognitive development of children was inspired by his observation of his own nephew and daughter. In 1936 was the first psychologist to make a systematic study of cognitive development. Detailed observational studies of cognition in children and a series of simple but ingenious or creative tests to reveal different cognitive abilities. These observations reinforce his budding hypothesis that children's minds were not merely smaller versions of adult minds. Piaget's theory of cognitive development suggests that children move through 4 different stages of mental development. His theory focuses not only on understanding how children acquire knowledge, but also on understanding the nature of intelligences. So here are the 4 stages of his theory. The sensory motor stage, birth to 2 years. Pre-operational stage, ages 2 to 7. Concrete operational stage, ages 7 to 11. Formal operational stage, ages 12 and up. Piaget suggested that there is qualitative change in how children think as they gradually process through these 4 stages. A child at age 7 doesn't just have more information about the world than he did at age 2. So there is a fundamental change in how he thinks about the world. We're here now in the 3rd principles of learning, psychosocial theory of development by Erik Erikson. Erik Homburger Erikson was a Danish-German-American, born on June 15, 1902, and died on May 12, 1994. Erik Erikson first published his 8-stage theory of human development in his 1950 book, Childhood and Society. The chapter featuring the model was titled The 8 Ages of Man. So, here are the following 8 stages. The first is trust versus mistrust. Second, autonomy versus shame and doubt. Third is initiative versus guilt. Fourth, industry versus inferiority. Fifth, identity versus role confusion. Sixth, intimacy versus isolation. Last but not the least, generativity versus stagnation. And the last one is ego integrity versus despair. So Erik Erikson maintained that personality develops in a predetermined order through 8 stages of psychosocial development, from infancy to adulthood. Yan. According to his theory, successful completion of each stage results in healthy personality and the acquisition of basic virtues. Yan. Failure to successfully complete a stage can result in a reduced ability to complete further stages and therefore a more unhealthy personality and sense of self. Yan. So the next principles will be presented by Mr. John Gail Atilano and the rest of my members. Ladies and gentlemen, it's your turn.
Thank you, Mr. Nico, and good day, Coach Jude. I will identify the social cultural theory, ecological theory, and classical conditioning theory. Socio-cultural theory by Lev Vygotsky. Over the last several decades, Lev Vygotski's work has served as foundation for much research and theory in cognitive development, notably what has come to be known as socio-cultural theory. Socio-cultural theory views human development as a social mediated process in which children acquire the cultural beliefs, values, and problem-solving strategies through collaborative dialogues with more knowledgeable members of society. Did you know that Vygotsky theory is comprised of concepts such as culture-specific tools, private speech, and the zone of proximal development? Every function in the child's cultural development appears twice, first on the social level and later on the individual level. First, between the people, or also be known as interpsychological, and then the second is inside the children, or also known as intrapsychological. This applies equally to voluntary attention, to logical memory, and to the formation of concept. All the higher functions originate as actual relationship between individuals. Ecological Theory by von Winfriner. Von Winfriner claimed most early studies were unidirectional, meaning that the laboratory studies observed the influence of A and B. Example, a stranger and mother with a child, rather than looking at the possible influence of the child on the stranger and mother or any other third party's influence. Von Brinner perspective has some resemblance on the work of Albert Bandura's social learning theory and Lev Vygotski's social cultural theory, in which the environment is explicitly or implicitly considered as a crucial mechanism in development. Von Winfriner's ecological system theory views the child's development as a complex system of relationships affected by multiple levels of the surrounding environment, from immediate settings of family and schools to a broad culture, values, law, and custom. Von Winfriner divided the person's environment into 5 different systems: the microsystem, the mesosystem, the exosystem, the macrosystem, and the chronosystem. The learning principle of ecological theory is to strengthen the development between the ecological system and education practices. Teachers and parents should keep a good communication with each other and work together to benefit the child. Classical conditioning, also known as Pavlovian or respondent conditioning, is a learning through association and discovered by Pavlov, a Russian psychologist. In simplest terms, 2 stimuli are linked together to produce a new learned response in a person or animal. The most famous example of classical conditioning was Pavlov's experiments with the dogs. Were celebrated in response to a bell tone. Pavlov showed that when a bell tone was sounded each time the dog was fed, the dog learned to associate the sounds with the presentation of food. There are 3 stages of classical conditioning: before conditioning, during conditioning, and after conditioning.
Thank you, Mr. John, for discussing the 3 theories, which are sociocultural theory by Lev Vygotsky, ecological theory by von Winfriner, and classical conditioning theory by Ivan Pavlov. And now, we will identify the last 4 theories. So now let's start to operant conditioning theory by B.F. Skinner. So the term operant conditioning was coined by B.F. Skinner in 1937 in the context of reflect physiology. It played a key role in helping psychologists to understand how behavior is learned. It is a method of learning normally attributed to B.F. Skinner, where the consequences of a response determine the probability of it being repeated. So the second theory is multiple intelligence theory by Howard Gardner. So Howard Gardner proposed that people are not born with all of the intelligence they will ever have. So this theory challenged the traditional notion that there is one single type of intelligence, sometimes known as G, for general intelligence, that only focuses on cognitive abilities. So Gardner proposed that there are 8 intelligences: the visual spatial intelligence, linguistic verbal intelligence, logical mathematical intelligence, bodily kinesthetic intelligence, musical intelligence, interpersonal intelligence, intrapersonal intelligence, and naturalistic intelligence. So, the third theory is metacognitive theory by John Flavel. So, metacognition refers to the higher order thinking which involves active control over the cognitive processes engaged in learning. So, the term metacognition is most often associated with John Flavel in 1979. According to Flavel 1979-1987, metacognition consists of both metacognitive knowledge and metacognitive experiences or regulation. Flavel further divides metacognitive knowledge into three categories: knowledge of person variables, task variables, and strategy variables. So the fourth or the last theory is laws of learning theory by Edward Thorndike. So Edward Thorndike developed the first three laws of learning: the readiness, exercise, and the effect. So according to these laws, learning is achieved when an individual is able to form associations between a particular stimulus and a response. So the learning theory of Thorndike represents the original SR framework of behavioral psychology. So this is the end of the video that had discussed about the different theories. All those theories that was discussed in this video are the learning principles. Good day everyone. So now let's move on to the task 10, which we are going to describe each learning principles. So the first one is psychoanalytic and psychosexual theory of Sigmund Freud. So Sigmund Freud's psychoanalytic theory of personality argues that human behavior is the result of the interactions among three component parts of the mind: the id, ego, and the superego. So the id is the most primitive part of the personality that is the source of our basic urges. This part of personality is entirely unconscious and serves as the source of libidinal energy. The ego is the component of personality that is charged with dealing with reality and helps ensure that the demands of the id are satisfied in ways that are realistic, safe, and socially acceptable. The superego is the part of the personality that holds all of the internalized morals and standards that we acquire from our family, parents, and the society at large. Freud believed that the id, ego, and the superego are in constant conflict and that adult personality and behavior are rooted in the results of these internal struggles throughout childhood. He believed that a person who has a strong ego has a healthy personality and that imbalances in this system can lead to neurosis, what we now think of as anxiety and depression, and unhealthy behaviors. Freud proposed that personality development in childhood takes place during 5 psychosexual stages, which are the oral, anal, phallic, latency, and the genital stages. During each stages, sexual energy is expressed in different ways and through different parts of the body. These are called psychosexual stages because each stage represents the fixation of libido on a different area of the body. As a person grows, physically certain areas of their body become important as sources of potential frustration. pleasure, or both. Oral stage from birth to 1 year, Freud said oral stimulation could lead to an oral fixation in later life. We see oral personalities all around us, such as smokers, nail biters, finger chewers, and dumb suckers. Oral personalities engage in such oral behaviors, particularly when under stress. During the oral stages, the baby gets much satisfaction from putting all sorts of things in its mouth to satisfy the libido, and thus it demands, which at this stage in life are oral or mouth-oriented, such as sucking, biting, and breastfeeding. Anal stage from 1 to 3 years old. So Freud believed that this type of conflict tends to come to a head in potty training, in which adults impose restrictions on when and where the child can defecate. The nature of this first conflict with authority can determine the child's future relationship with all forms of authority. During the anal stage of psychosexual development, the libido becomes focused on the anus, and the child derives great pleasure from defecating. The child now is fully aware that they are a person in their own right, and that their wishes can bring them into conflict with demands of the outside world. So the phallic stage from 3 to 6 years old. The phallic stage is the third stage of psychosexual development, spanning the ages of 3 to 6 years, wherein the infant's libido centers upon their genitalia as the erogenous zone. The child becomes aware of anatomical sex differences, which sets in motion the conflict between erotic attraction, resentment, rivalry, jealousy, and fear, which Freud called the Oedipus complex in boys and the Electra complex in girls. So the latency stage is from 6 years to puberty. Freud thought that most sexual impulses are repressed during the latent stage, and sexual energy can be sublimated towards schoolwork, hobbies, and friendships. The latency stage is the fourth stage of psychosexual development, spanning the period of 6 years to puberty. During this stage, the libido is dormant and no further psychosexual developments takes place. Much of the child's energy is channeled into developing new skills and acquiring new knowledge, and play becomes largely confined to other children of the same gender. So the genital stage from puberty to adult. The genital stage is the last stage of Freud's psychosexual theory of personality development and begins in puberty. It is a time of adolescent sexual experimentation, the successful resolution of which is setting down in a loving one-to-one relationships with another person in our 20s. Sexual instinct is directed heterosexual pleasure rather than self-pleasure like during the phallic stage. For Freud, the proper outlet of sexual instinct in adults was through heterosexual intercourse. Fixation and conflict may prevent it, with the consequence that sexual perversion may develop. So the second learning principles is the cognitive theory by Jean Piaget. So Jean Piaget's theory of cognitive development suggests that children move through 4 different stages of mental development. His theory focuses not only on understanding how children acquire knowledge, but also on understanding the nature of intelligence. Piaget believed that children take an active role in the learning process. acting much like little scientists as they perform experiments, make observations, and learn about the world. As kids interact with the world around them, they continually add new knowledge upon existing knowledge and adapt previously held ideas to accommodate new information. Based on his observation, he concluded that children were not less intelligent than adults. They simply think differently. In Piaget's view, early cognitive development involves processes based upon actions and later progresses to changes in mental operations. Through his observation of his children, Piaget developed a stage theory of intellectual development that included 4 distinct stages. The sensory-motor stages from birth to 2 years old. During the sensory-motor stage, the children go through a period of dramatic growth and learning. As kids interact with their environment, they are continually making new discoveries about how the world works. So the major characteristics and developmental changes of these sensory-motor stages are: the infant knows the world through their movements and sensations. The children learn about the world through basic action such as sucking, grasping, looking, and listening. Infants learn that things continue to exist even though they cannot be seen. They are separate beings from the people and objects around them. They realize that their action can cause things to happen in the world around them. During the earliest stage of cognitive development, infants and the toddlers acquire knowledge through sensory experiences and manipulating objects. A child's entire experiences at the earliest period of this stage occurs through basic reflexes, senses, and motor responses. The cognitive development that occurs during this period takes place over a relatively short period, time, and involves a great deal with growth. Children not only learn how to perform physically actions such as crawling and walking, they also learn a great deal about language from people with whom they interact. The pre-operational stage, ages 2 to 7 years old. The pre-operational stage is the second stage in Piaget theory of cognitive development. This stage begins around 2 as children start to talk and lasts until approximately age 7. At this stage, kids learn through pretend play but still struggle with logic and taking the point of view of other people. They also often struggle with understanding the idea of constancy. Piaget noted that children in this stage do not yet understand concrete knowledge, cannot mentally manipulate information, and are unable to take the point of view of other people, which he termed egocentrism. The major characteristics and developmental changes of pre-operational stage are: children begin to think symbolically and learn to use words and pictures to present objects. Children at this stage tend to be egocentric and struggle to see things from perspective of others. While they are getting better with language and thinking, they still tend to think about things in very concrete terms. The foundations of language development may have been laid during the previous stage, but it is the emergence of language that is one of the major hallmarks of the pre-operational stage of development. The concrete operational stage, ages 7 to 11 years old. So the concrete operational stage is the third stage in Piaget's theory of cognitive development. This period spans the time of the middle childhood. It begins around age 7 and continues until approximately age 11. and is characterized by the development of logical thought. Thinking still tends to be very concrete, but children become much more logical and sophisticated in their thinking during this stage of development. This is an important stage in and of itself. It also serves as an important transition between early stages of development and the coming stage where kids will learn how to think more abstractly and hypothetically. Kids at this age become more logical about concrete and specific things, but they still struggle with abstract ideas. The formal operational stage, ages 12 and up. The formal operational stage is the fourth and final stage of Jean Piaget's theory of cognitive development. It begins at approximately age 12 and lasts into adulthood. The major characteristics and developmental changes of formal operational stages is at this stage, the adolescent or young adult begins to think abstractly and to reason about hypothetically problems. The third learning principles is psychosocial theory of development by Erik Erikson. Erik Erikson was an ego psychologist who developed one of the most popular and influential theories of development. Erikson theory described the impact of social experience across the whole lifespan. Erikson was interested in how social interactions and relationships play a role in the development and growth of the human beings. Erikson's theory centered on psychosocial development rather than psychosexual development. According to Erikson, a person passes through 8 developmental stages that build on each other. At each stage, we face the crisis. By resolving the crisis, we develop psychological strength or character traits that help us become confident and healthy people. So, trust versus mistrust. Psychosocial stage number 1. The trust versus mistrust stage is the first stage of psychologist Erik Erikson theory of psychosocial development. This stage begins at birth and lasts until your child is around 18 months old, according to Erikson. It is the most important time period of your child's life, as it shapes their view of the world as well as their overall personality. Erikson believed that early patterns of trust help children build a strong base of trust that's crucial of their social and emotional development. If a child successfully develops trust, they will feel safe and secure in the world. You're essentially shaping their personality and determine how they will view the world. Autonomy versus shame and doubt is psychosocial stage number 2. So, autonomy versus shame and doubt is the second stage of Erik Erikson's stages of psychosocial development. This stage occurs between the ages of 18 months to around age 2 or 3 years. According to Erikson, children at this stage are focused on developing a greater sense of self-control. During stage 2, if you are a parent or if you have ever interacted with a child between the ages of 18 months and 3 years, then you have probably witnessed many of the hallmarks of the autonomy versus shame and doubt stage. It is at this point in development that young children begin to express a greater need for independence and control over themselves and the world around them. Initiative versus guilt psychosocial stage number 3. So, initiative versus guilt in the third stage of Erikson theory of psychosocial development. This stage occurs during the preschool years between the ages of 3 and 5. During the initiative versus guilt stage, children begin to assert their power and control over the world through directing play and other social interactions. This stage can sometimes be frustrating for parents and caregivers as children begin to exercise more control over the things that impact their lives. Such decision can range from the friends they play with, the activities they engage in, and the way that they approach different tasks. Parents and other adults might want to guide children toward certain friends, activities, or choices, but children might resist and insist on making their own choices. While this might lead to some conflicts with parental wishes at the times, it is important to give kids a chance to make such choices. However, it is important that parents continue to enforce safe boundaries and encourage children to make good choices through the use of modeling and reinforcement. Industry versus inferiority, stage 4 of psychosocial development. Industry versus inferiority is the fourth stage of Erik Erikson's theory of psychosocial development, which happens after the third stage of initiative versus guilt. The stage occurs during childhood between the ages of approximately 6 and 11. According to Erikson's theory, people progress through a series of stages as they develop and grow, unlike many other developmental theories. Erikson addresses changes that occur across the entire lifespan, from birth to death. During the industry versus inferiority stage, children become capable of performing increasing complex tasks. As a result, they strive to master new skills. Children who are encouraged and commended by parents and teachers develop a feeling of a competence and belief in their abilities. Those who receive little or no encouragement from parents, teachers, or peers will doubt their ability to be successful. So now, let's proceed to Miss Riza. She will also describe different learning principles. Miss Riza?
Thank you, Miss Ella May Casimiro. Good day, Coach Jude, and good day, classmates. Today, I'm going to describe the three theories: the social-cultural theories by Lev Vygotsky, ecological theory by Bronben Fenner, and the last is classical conditioning by Ivan Pavlov. So let's begin with the social-cultural theory by Lev Vygotsky. Lev Vygotsky was a Russian teacher who is considered a pioneer in learning in social context. As a psychologist, he was also the first to examine how our social interaction influence our cognitive growth. He was convinced the learning occurred through interaction with others in our communities, peers, adults, teachers, and other mentors. Vygotsky's social-cultural theories views human development as a socially mediated process in which children acquire their cultural values, beliefs, and problem-solving strategies through collaborative dialogues with more knowledgeable members of society. Vygotsky's theory is comprised of concepts such as culture-specific tools, private speech, and the zone of proximal development. Vygotsky's social-cultural theory of human learning describes learning as a social intelligence in society or culture. Vygotsky believed everything is learned in two levels. First, through interaction with others, and then integrated into the individual's mental structure. Vygotsky created three stages of speech and language development: the external, ecocentric, and the inner speech. So let's proceed with the ecological theory by Bronben Fenner. Bronbenfenner's ecological system theory views child development as a complex system of relationships affected by multiple levels of surrounding environment, from immediate settings of family and school to broad cultural values, laws, and customs. Bronbenfenner's ecological system theory focuses on the quality and context of the child's environment. He states that as a child develops, the interaction within these environments becomes more complex. This complexity can arise as child's physical and cognitive structures growth and mature. Bronbenfenner's ecological system theory is one of the most accepted explanations regarding the influence of social environments of human development. This theory argues that the environment you grow up in affects you facets in your life. Social factors determine your way of thinking, the emotions you feel, and your likes and dislikes. Bronbenfenner's theory identifies four systems within which children exist that would be combined to have an impact upon how they grow and develop. He uses the term microsystem, mesosystem, exosystem, and the macrosystem. Now, let's proceed to the third one, classical conditioning theory by Ivan Pavlov. Classical conditioning is learning through association and was discovered by Pavlov, a Russian psychologist. In simple terms, two stimuli are linked together to produce a new learned response in a person or animal. Classical condition is a type of learning that happens unconsciously. When you learn through classical condition, an automatic condition response is paired with a specific stimulus. This creates a behavior. We're all exposed to classical condition in one way or another throughout our lives. The three stages of classical conditioning are before acquisition, and after acquisition. So that's all for the three theory. Now let's proceed to the next reporter, Mr. Nicole Canciller. Mr. Nicole, it's your turn.
Thank you, Miss Raisa. I'm Nicole J. Canciller, and today I'm going to discuss Task 10, Operant Conditioning. So, what is operant conditioning? Also known as an instrumental conditioning, it is a method of learning normally attributed to B.F. Skinner, where the consequences of a response determine the probability of it being repeated through operant conditioning. Behavior which is reinforced or rewarded will be likely to be repeated, and behavior which is punished will occur less frequently. Skinner is regarded as the father of operant conditioning, but his work was based on Thomas Thorndike in 1898, the law of effect. So, what is the law? What is the two law of effect? So, there's positive reinforcement. Positive reinforcement is a term described by B.F. Skinner in his theory of operant conditioning in positive reinforcement. A response behavior is regarded strengthened by rewards to repetition of desires behavior. This reward reinforcing the stimulus. And also the negative reinforcement. Negative reinforcement is the determination of unpleasant state following a response. This is known as negative reinforcement because it is a state of removal of adverse stimulus, which is rewarding to the animal or person. Negative reinforcement is strengthened behaviors because it stops or removes unpleasant experience to them. So, theory of multiple intelligence. This theory suggests that traditional psychometric views of intelligence are too limited. In order to capture the full range of abilities and talents, people possess Gardner theories that people do not have an intellectual capacity but have many kinds of intelligence. So, what is this intelligence? First of all, there are visual spatial intelligence. These are people who are strong in visual spatial intelligence. are good in visualing things. These individuals are often good with direction as well as map, charts, videos, and pictures. 2. Linguistic verbal intelligence. These are people who are strong in linguistic verbal intelligence. They are able to use the words well both when writing and speaking. These individuals are typically very good at writing stories, memorizing information, and reading. Logical mathematical intelligence. These are people who are strong logically, mathematically intelligence. They are good at reasoning, recognizing patterns, and logically analyzing problems. These individuals tend to think conceptually and about numbers, relationship, and patterns. Bodily kinesthetic intelligence. These are people with high bodily kinesthetic intelligence are said to be good at body movements, performing action physical controls. People who are strong in this area tend to have an excellent hand-eye conditioning and dexterity. Musical intelligence. These are people who are had strong musical intelligence, are good in thinking patterns, rhythms, and sounds. They have a strong appreciation for music and have often good musical composition and performance. Intrapersonal intelligence. These are people with strong interpersonal intelligence, are good at understanding and interacting with other people. These are individual skills and assessing the emotion and motivational desires and intention of those around them. Intrapersonal intelligence. These are individuals who are strong in intrapersonal intelligence, are good at being aware of their own emotional state, feelings, and emotions. They tend to enjoy self-reflection and analyzing, including daydreaming, exploring relationship with others, and assessing their personal strength. Naturalistic intelligence. Naturalistic intelligence is most recent additioning to the Gardner's theory and has been met with more resistance than his original several intelligence theories. According to Gardner, individuals who have high in this type of intelligence are more tuned with nature and are often interested in nurturing, exploring environment, and learning about other species. These are individuals are said to be highly aware of subtle changes in their environment. Metacognitive by John Plabel. John Plabel argues that learning is maximized when the students learn to think about their thinking and continuously employs strategies to maximize their reasoning and problem capabilities. A metacognitive thinker knows when and how he learns best and employ strategies to overcome the barriers to learning. Metacognitive thinkers knows when and how he learns to best and employ strategies to overcome barriers learning as a students to regulate and monitor their self through processing, understanding. They also learn to adapt new learning challenges, expert problem solvers, first seek to deploy an understanding of a problem by thinking in terms of core concept and major properties. Law of Learning by Edward Thorndike. Edward Lee Thorndike was a professional American psychology, a discipline of William James, who developed a series of laws about trial and error learning. Thorndike theories are considered as processors of American behaviors that would find maximum exponent to figure out Skinner's pattern of operant conditioning. So, first of all, there's law of preparation. That affirms the preparation or disposition of the subject contributes to the learning. In other words, that own expectation of their subject constitute the intrinsic reinforcement of all actions. Law of exercise that sustain the exercise or the practical of appropriating response contributes to the strength to the connection between the stimulus and the corresponding responses. Law of effect. This is the considered and most important according to this law. The succession in the stimulus and the responses is not enough for learning. Occur for the learner to happen. Reinforcement needs this is what when an act is followed by a reward tend to repeat itself, where when it's followed by a punishment, the probability is repetition decrease. Multiple intelligence theory by Howard Gardner. The multiple intelligence theory states that it is to benefit both the students and instructor if the student's intelligence can be defined, meaning that there are more intelligence and there are more intelligence, not just one intelligence. Metacognitive by John Plabel. John Plabel argues that learning is maximized when the students learn to think about their thinking and consequently employ strategies to maximize their reasoning and problem-solving capabilities. Law of Learning by Edward Tyrone Dyke. Edward Tyrone Dyke develops the first three laws of learning, which is readiness, exercise, and effects. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cancelier. We are here now to the social cultural theory that was proposed by Lev Vygotsky. So the main idea of this theory is that the ways people interact with others and the culture they live in shape their mental abilities. Vygotsky believed that parents, relatives, peers, and society all have an important role in forming higher levels of functioning. It describes learning as a social process and the origination of human intelligence in society or culture. The major theme of Vygotsky's theoretical framework is that social interaction plays a fundamental role in the development of cognition. He believed everything is learned on two levels. First is through interaction with others and then integrated into the individual's mental structure. Every function in the child's cultural development appears twice. First on the social level and later on the individual level. First between people that we call interpsychological, and then inside the child also called intrapsychological. This applies equally to voluntary attention, to logical memory, and to the formation of concepts. All the higher functions originate as actual relationships between individuals. A second aspect of this theory is the idea that the potential of cognitive developments is limited to a zone of proximal development or ZPD. This zone is the area of exploration for which the student is cognitively prepared but requires help and social interaction to fully develop. A teacher or more experienced peer is able to provide the learner with scaffolding to support the student's evolving understanding of knowledge domains or development of complex skills. Collaborative learning, discourse or what we call conversation, modeling, and scaffolding are strategies for supporting the intellectual knowledge and skills of learners and facilitating intentional learning. So to illustrate Vygotsky's concept of scaffolding, we are going to use an example of a 5-year-old boy who is learning to ride a bike. So the little boy's father has MKO, or more knowledge order. We may begin by holding onto the back and with his one hand at the front of his bike. So the whole time that he is on the bike. As the little boy gains more experience, his father may release his arm intermittently. Eventually, the boy's father only grabs the bike when he needs to correct his balance. When the boy finally masters the skill, his father no longer needs to hold onto his bike anymore, and the scaffolds can be removed. So that's how sociocultural theory works. So the next is ecological theory by Brenner. So ecological model organizes context of development into 5 nested levels of external influence. As we can see in the image below, we have microsystem, mesosystem, ecosystem, macrosystem, and chronosystem. These levels are categorized from the most intimate level to the broadest. So the first one is microsystem. It is the smallest and most immediate environment in which children live, and from the word micro. The microsystem comprises the home, school, or daycare, peer group, and community environment of the children. Interactions within the microsystem typically involve personal relationships with family members, classmates, teachers, and caregivers. How these groups or individuals interact with the children will affect how they develop. More nurturing and supportive interactions and relationships will likely to foster a better environment for development. Second, mesosystem encompasses the interaction of the different microsystems which children find them in. It is in essence a system of microsystems, and as such involves linkage between home and school, between peer group and family, and between family and community. So in this theory, if a child's parents are actively involved in the friendship of their child, for example, they invite their child's friends over to their house from time to time and spend time with them, and then the child's development is affected positively through harmony and like-mindedness. However, if the child's parents dislike their child's peers and openly criticize them, the child will experience disequilibrium and conflicting emotions, which will likely lead to negative development. So in exosystem, it pertains to the linkages that may exist between 2 or more settings, one of which may not contain the developing children but affect them indirectly nonetheless. In these findings, people and places that children may not directly interact with may still have an impact on their lives. Such places and people may include the parents' workplaces, extended family members, and the neighborhood that children live in. Lastly, the chronosystem that adds the useful dimensions of time to Brenner's ecological system theory. It demonstrates the influence of both change and constancy in the children's environment. The chronosystem may include a change in family structure, address, parents' employment status, as well as immense society changes such as economic cycles and wars. So again, this theory views child development as a complex system of relationships affected by multiple levels of the surroundings environments, from immediate settings of family and school to broad cultural values, laws, and customs. So next is the classical conditioning by Ivan Pavlov. So classical conditioning, also called Pavlovian conditioning, is learning through the association of a neutral stimulus with a biologically potent stimulus. The biologically potent stimulus is an involuntary response, also known as reflex or reflexive response. So after Pavlov did an experiment session with his dog, he proposed the 3 stages of classical conditioning, which are before acquisition, and after acquisition. So before classical conditioning begins, the unconditioned stimulus, defined as a stimulus that leads to an automatic response, produces an unconditioned response that is an unlearned response that occurs automatically when the unconditioned stimulus is presented. In an individual naturally, this is a reflex reaction that doesn't require training or practice. It is also called the primary reinforce. And for example, in Pavlov's experiments, feeding dogs, the food or the unconditioned stimulus comes naturally, causes them to salivate, which is UR, or the unconditioned response became. This reaction was an unconditioned reflex. So during acquisition, the neutral stimulus is paired repeatedly with the unconditioned stimulus to form an association. It generally takes the pair of stimuli multiple pairings to become associated. But sometimes the association can be formed by a single NS or US pairing without repetition. So for example, a dog barks, so NS, or what we call neutral stimulus, and then bit US, the unconditioned stimulus in a child's leg. The child was very scared, so UR, unconditional stimulus happened. When this child hears a dog bark again, the CS, or conditioned stimulus, that is substitute stimulus that triggers the same response. They tremble with fear, so CR, or the unconditioned response. This learning process only took one pairing to complete. So after acquisition, the neutral stimulus becomes a conditioned stimulus, or CS. The conditioned stimulus can trigger the same response as the unconditioned stimulus can, even when it is not present. When the involuntary response is triggered by a conditioned stimulus, it is called the conditioned response, or the CR. The conditioned response is learned response. The conditioned response and an unconditioned response are usually the same or similar response. For example, after being paired repeatedly with food, US becomes unconditional stimulus. The sound of the bell, NS, a previous neutral stimulus, could cause the dogs to salivate, or CR by itself. And so that's it. In simple terms, 2 stimuli are linked together to produce a new learned response in a person or animal. So the next theory will be explained by Mr. Atilano. So we may proceed.
Thank you, Ms. Aniko. Again, good day, Coach Jude. I will discuss about operant conditioning, multiple intelligence theory, metacognitive, law of learning. Operant conditioning is a learning approach that uses rewards and punishment to influence behavior. A connection is formed between a behavior and consequences, whether is it positive or negative. For the behavior to operant conditioning, for example, when the love rat press a lever while a green light turns on, they are rewarded with food pellets. When they press the lever with the red light is on, they receive a mild electric shock. As a result, they learn to press the lever when the green light is on, and to avoid the red light. The multiple intelligence theory states that it is the benefits of both the student and the instructors if the student's intelligence can be identified. Identifying a student intelligence allows the instructor to select appropriate activities for the student in the classroom and guide their learning journey more effectively. While there are 9 different intelligence in total, it must be noted that instructors traditionally gear tasks towards the verbal, linguistic, and logical mathematical intelligences. Metacognitive theory. John Flaubel argues that learning is maximized when students learn to think about their thinking and consciously employ strategies to maximize their reasoning and problem-solving capabilities. Metacognitive is thinking about your own thinking. It is one of the components of a self-regulated learning. Metacognition has two related dimensions: knowledge of cognition and regulation of cognition. Thorndike was one of the early psychologists who tried to interpret learning by connecting links or linking stimuli and responses. He saw that the most effective forms of science in man and animals alike learning by trial or error. This type of learning is evident when the learners encounters a problematic situations that must be solved and overcome to a goal. Edward Thorndike developed the first three laws of learning: readiness, exercise, and effects. He said also that the law of effects, which means that any behavior that is followed by pleasant consequences is like to be repeated, and any behavior followed by unpleasant consequences is likely to be avoided.
A good day to each and everyone. A good day to you, Coach. It's me again. Today, I'm going to give an example of the 7 theories. First is psychoanalytic and psychosexual theory of Sigmund Freud. Second is cognitive theory by Jean Piaget. Third is psychosocial theory of development by Erik Erikson. Fourth, socio-cultural theory by Lev Vygotsky. Fifth is ecological theory by Bronfenner. Sixth, classical conditioning by Ivan Pavlov. And the last is operant conditioning by B.F. Skinner. So, let's start with psychoanalytic theory by Sigmund Freud. Freud believed that events in our childhood have a great influence on our adult lives, shaping our personality. For example, anxiety originating from traumatic experiences in a person's past hidden from consciousness and may cause a problem during adulthood. Thus, when we explain our behavior to ourselves or others, we rarely give a true account of our motivation. This is not because we are deliberately lying. While human beings are great deceivers of others, they are even more adept at self-discipline. So that's an example of a psychoanalytic theory. So another theory of Sigmund Freud is psychosexual theory. Freud believed that the unconscious mind is filled with memories, thoughts, needs that have been suppressed. For example, if you experience rejection as a child, you might bury those negative feelings in your unconscious so you don't have to deal with them. This repressed feeling, however, still drive you towards different behaviors and influence your personality. Many of the feelings that we repress begin in childhood. They could be memories that we are not aware that we had. The memories could be based on experiences from the first 2 years of our lives. Through his work with adults, Freud created the stages of psychosexual development. He believed that much of our personality formation occurred within the first 5 years of life. If a patient was facing troubling habits or neuroses of any sort, Freud could trace it back to experiences and desires of early childhood. So now, let's proceed to Jean Piaget's cognitive theory. Children grow and develop rapidly in their first 5 years across the 4 main areas of development. These areas are motor, language and communication, cognitive and social, or emotional. Cognitive development means how children think, explore, and figure things out. It is the development of knowledge, skills, problem solving, and dispositions. which help children to think about and understand the world around them. Brain development is part of cognitive development. To promote your child's cognitive development, it is important that you actively engage in quality interaction on a daily basis. Expanding on your child's interest in specific learning activities. For example, your toddler might show an early interest in dinosaurs, so you can take him or her on a trip to the Natural History Museum to learn more about the time that these creatures roamed the earth. So let's proceed to the third one, psychosocial theory by Erik Erikson. One of the strengths of psychosocial theory is that it provides a broad framework from which to view development throughout the entire lifespan. It also allows us to emphasize the social nature of human beings and the important influence that social relationship. According to Erik Erikson, personality development as a process influenced by social and cultural factors throughout the lifespan. See Erik Erikson, 8 Stages of Psychosocial Development. According to Erik Erikson, personality development as a process influenced by social and cultural factors throughout the lifespan. See Erikson's 8 Stages of Psychosocial Development. The development of both prosocial behavior and antisocial behavior. Psychosocial behavior development involves changes not only in children's over behavior but also in their social cognition. For example, they become able to take the perspective of others and to understand that other people's behavior is based on their knowledge and desires. So let's move on to socio-cultural theory. According to Vygotsky's theory, as children are given instruction or shown how to perform a certain task, they organize the new information received in their existing mental schemas. They use this information as guides on how to perform these tasks and eventually learn to perform them independently. For example, a 5-year-old child knows how to ride a bicycle with 3 wheels but can't ride a bicycle with 2 wheels unless his mother or father holds into the back of her bike. And according to Vygotsky's theory, this child is in the zone of proximal development for riding bicycle. With her mother and father help, the little girl learns to balance her bike. After some practicing, she can ride a bike on her own. So now let's proceed to ecological theory by Bronfenbrenner. American psychologist Yuri Bronfenbrenner formulated the ecological system theory to explain how social environment affects the children's development. This theory emphasizes the importance of studying children in multiple environments, known as ecological system, in the attempt to understand their development. According to Bronfenbrenner's ecological theory, if the child's parents are actively involved in the friendships of their child, for example, they invite their child's friends over their house from the time to time and spend time with them, then the child's development is affected positively through harmony and like-mindedness. However, if the child's parents dislike their child's peer and openly criticize them, the child will experience disequilibrium and conflicting emotions which will likely and lead to negative development. So now, let's proceed to classical conditioning theory by Ivan Pavlov. Classical conditioning, also known as Pavlovian or respondent conditioning, is learning through association and was discovered by Pavlov, a Russian psychologist. In simple terms, two stimuli are linked together to produce a new learned response in a person or animal. For example, fear of dog. Let's say you walk the same route to school each day. As you pass a particular house, a dog in the yard would bark loudly at you, baring its teeth. This is a frightening experience, particularly as a young child. Prior to this, dogs were a fairly neutral stimulus. Years later, you may experience a case of spontaneously recovery. You may not even remember the childhood dog specifically, but as you walk past a similar looking house with a "Beware of Dog" sign on the fence, you get unnerved and start to tremble. Now, let's proceed to the last theory, which is operant conditioning theory by B.F. Skinner. Operant conditioning is a type of learning that happens when certain behaviors are rewarded or punished. Thus, the participants, or in this case, the students, become conditioned to perform a certain behaviors instead of others in the anticipation of punishment or reward. The behaviorist classified responses into three different types. First is reinforcers. This kind of response increases the chances of behavior being repeated. It can be either positive or negative. Second, neutral operant. This kind of response neither increases or decreases the chances of behavior being repeated. And the third one is punisher. This kind of response decreases the chances of behavior being repeated. This is why punishment are used to weaken behavior. Example of reinforcers real life situation. For example, public speaking and debates are popular activities that are organized in most schools. Considered a scenario where a child has to participate in a debate. If the child is applauded by his or her peers and teachers, they will be encouraged to take up similar activities in the future. On the other hand, the child may develop stage fright or grow a dislike for such activities if he or she is laughed at. This is a clear example of how reinforcement can positively encourage humans to repeat the same behavior. So that would be all for the 7 theories. Now let's proceed to the other reporter, which is Miss Ella May Casimiro. Miss Ella May, it's your turn.
Thank you, Ms. Raisa, for giving that examples. So now I will be giving additional examples for the last 3 learning principles. Multiple intelligence theory by Howard Gardner. So in real life or classroom situations, students are unique. They have different intelligence, like multiple intelligence. It has different areas in which it represents the intelligence of a student. For example, some students learn faster by talking, which we call people who are strong in linguistic verbal intelligence, are able to use words well, both when writing and speaking. These individuals are typically very good at writing stories, memorizing information, and reading. So number 2, metacognitive theory by John Flavel. In basing the metacognitive in a read situation, as a teacher, we should make activities or lessons that will make a child think or process the data to get the right learning information. So the number 3 is Laws of Learning by Edward Thorndike. So in the Laws of Learning shows the 3 laws of learning, which the readiness, exercises, and effect. It somehow shows the behavior of students in which students will follow pleasant consequences will be repeated, while those who are not will be avoided. That is all the examples of the learning principles as applied in the classroom or in the real life situations.